When there was peace. A story about peace. Written by Potlako Mokgadi. When there was peace, when there was friendship, forbearance, a healing state of silence and tranquility, when there was the virtue of peacefulness, all were one with everything, for in everything was the Spirit, the same Spirit, like a spider's web, woven through everything, permeating everything, the Spirit was everywhere. There was no place where peace was not, for there was no place. Everything was one. And everything was one with the Spirit, and the Spirit was one with everything. For the Spirit was God, and that was security in God. Lost were those who sought security in unrest. They were on a path so wide, a being on this path could not see the left or right edge, and on this path, time was born. Time, it was to grant each enough time to find their way back to peace. And each being could take as much time as it wished, as it thought, or as it felt, as it needed to find its way back to peace. For time was infinite, though born, it would be as long as no one needed it anymore. And so, each being took as much as it needed to fight the war and unrest, to defeat the opponent. Each being took as much time to possess more time than its opponent, to emerge victorious from the war. Each being thought that if it were to win its war, it would find peace again. And so it happened that time put a stop to it, and declared that each being was allowed the time equivalent to the span of a lifetime. And that was the time that should suffice to find the way back to peace. And if the time of a lifetime were not enough, each being had to pass through the one gate of this path it was on which the word future stood. Opposite was a gate on which stood past. To the right and left edge of the path was the endless expanse of the gate without a gate, which led to peace. Each being was allowed at any time to leave the path on which it was and go to the gateless gate. And so, most beings fought their wars and fought their opponents. And in the turmoil of war, from time to time, the Spirit approached a being and asked, "I did not want to disturb you in your task. I see only your great suffering that you carry with you. And I wanted to ask you if you are now ready to come with me towards the gateless gate, back to peace." But most beings replied, "Don't you see, Spirit, that I am fighting for you and that I must emerge victorious from this war so that peace can be restored within me? I don't have time for you now, go and let me fight." And so the Spirit asked other beings who were fighting the war, "I also did not want to disturb you in your task. I now see your suffering and your pain. So I wanted to ask you too if you are ready to come with me towards peace." And the beings replied, "Don't you see, Spirit, that I am fighting for you? Don't you see that there will never be peace if I cannot decide the war for myself?" The Spirit knew that this was a promise. It was not an interpretation or a threat, it was a promise. There would never be peace within them, they said, if they could not decide the war for themselves. The Spirit withdrew, time moved on toward the gate that read future. Each being that had exhausted the time of a lifetime and remained in the war had to, at the end of its time, as time had determined, pass through the gate labeled future. Each being that still remained on the path at the end of its time had to, as time had determined, pass through the gate labeled future. Even the beings that returned from the gateless gate had to, at the end of their time, as time had determined, pass through the gate labeled future. Behind the gate, it was like in a pipe, like in a tunnel. It only went in one direction. And the beings who thought they were victorious walked, full of pride, arrogance, and self-satisfaction, through the gate and did not notice the darkness that surrounded them. and the beings who thought they were defeated walked in sorrow, envy, and anger through the gate and did not notice the darkness that surrounded them. Thus, victors and vanquished walked silently side by side, each being trapped in its own pain. It was a long, straight path that no one noticed was actually describing a large curve. After some time of walking, when they were halfway through the curve, the beings who believed themselves victorious realized that their arrogance, their self-satisfaction, and their pride had faded away. They now only felt the pain of their devastated souls. For many of their cities, where their peace once resided, had been burned down. Their churches, where they once communed with their spirits, were destroyed. Their rivers, sprung from the source of the Spirit, from which they quenched their thirst, were clogged with corpses. And their souls, once united with everything in the embrace of God, were ravaged and orphaned. From that moment on, a deep pain resided within them. The beings who thought themselves defeated had forgotten their sorrow, their envy, and their rage halfway along the path, which was a circle in a grand curve. They now only felt the pain of their devastated souls. For many of their cities, where their peace once resided, had been burned down. Their churches, where they once communed with their spirits, were destroyed. Their rivers, sprung from the source of the Spirit, from which they quenched their thirst, were clogged with corpses. And their souls, once united with everything in the embrace of God, were ravaged and orphaned. Until they came to another gate. On the gate was the word present, and at the gate, they met time, which spoke to them and said, "When you pass through this gate, you have the time of a lifetime to find your way back to peace." Everyone was looking forward to a new chance to do everything right this time. And so they walked through the gate into the present, where the same war still raged, which they had once left at the end of their time. In their jubilation, no one listened to what time still said to them. You will see what you have already seen. Recognize that you started this war. Do not fall into the belief that you must finish it. Turn your back on what you see. Set out on the path to peace, to the gateless gate, on the way to God. Those who believed they were victorious remembered their victory, their arrogance, their pride, and reached for the weapon to fight for the pride and arrogance that should reside in them again. Forgotten was peace. And those who believed they were defeated remembered their anger, their shame, and their envy, and reached for the weapon to fight for revenge and retaliation, so that reparation and revenge could reside in them. Forgotten was peace. But some being walked through this gate. And what the being saw in the present did not please him, so the being turned around, back to the gate it had come through. But the gate was locked, time had moved on. And a sign was placed on the gate that read past. This being looked around and saw the gateless gate. It turned its back on the war and ran with bliss to the gateless gate. It was delighted to have recognized the left and right edge of the path, knowing that the gateless gate was there. The gate that leads to peace. And to get there faster, it shed its burden, pride, arrogance, self-satisfaction, envy, anger, annoyance, fear, retaliation, mine, me, and I. It cast all these aside and rushed through the gateless gate, straight into peace, into the God enfolded. And some beings rejoiced with each one who followed suit. Rejoiced to be one with this being again and everything that bore the same spirit within it. And some beings turned around and turned their backs on the gateless gate, heading for the battlefield. They plunged into the battlefield but did not raise a weapon. Instead, they raised their voice and asked the same question to the other beings that the spirit had once asked them. I did not want to disturb you in your task. I see only your suffering and your pain, of which you say, it brings you joy to be so. I just wanted to ask if you are interested in knowing that I have found the way to the gateless gate. And if you are interested, we can leave this place right now and go there. What could possibly be there? The other being shouted back. What is that? The gateless gate. What is there to see in peace? What can I gain there? Can I get my pride back? My honor, my victory? Other beings asked. What could possibly be there? What is that? The gateless gate. What can peace give me? Can it give me revenge? Can it give me reparation? Can it turn the disgrace of my defeat into victory? Both beings always ended with the sentence, don't you see that it's what I strive for? Don't you recognize the magnitude and scope of this war? Don't you see that we will all benefit if I win my war? Yes, replied the being that had become the representative of the spirit. Yet, I recognize the magnitude and scope precisely, glancing for a moment in the direction of the gate labeled future, and then in the other direction at the gate labeled past. For a moment, the being fell silent. Then the being spoke, which had become the representative of the spirit. I stand at the edge of the battlefield, having turned my back on the war, my hands stretched backward. I will wait there until you reach for it. Then I will take a step forward, and you will reach your hand back until the next being comes and takes your hand. And so we will form a long chain until we can all pass through the gateless gate, one being after another, one hand in another, and the battlefield will soon be empty. Although the being that had become the representative of the spirit had returned from the gateless gate at its time's end, its lifetime had sufficed to find peace, it had too, like all the others, passed through the gate labeled future. For the being had remained on the path at its time's end, remaining to help many beings in the time of their lives to find peace. On its way through the tunnel, it heard the lamentation and rejoicing over a lost and a won war. Until these sounds fell silent again halfway, and everyone came to the other gate, on which the sign read present. Once again, there was time, and it spoke. You have the time of a lifetime to find peace. If you have not found peace in that time, then pass through the gate labeled future. There, at the end of this path, the gateless gate, to the left and right of this path, shall lead you to peace, and you can pass through it at any time. You will see what you have already seen. Recognize that you started it. Do not fall into the belief that you must finish it. Turn your back on what you see. Set out on the path to peace, to the gateless gate, on the way to God. Scarcely had the being that had become the representative of the spirit passed through the gate when time marched on. Suddenly it felt a hand reaching for it, and a voice rose. I would like to form a chain with you that can lead us to the gateless gate. Please hold my hand, and I will extend my other hand to those who are yet to come. And so, there were already two, and the number grew of those who joined the chain. And the number grew of those who also became representatives of the Spirit. Until today, we find beings everywhere who know the way to the gateless gate, but, out of the friendship of peace, out of the virtue of peacefulness, refrain from passing through the gateless gate to dwell in peace, until all beings know the way to the gateless gate and pass through it. These beings stand on the streets and squares, silently and admonishingly for peace. These beings stand in the houses of the Spirit and pray. Sometimes you can hear them pray. May joy and the source of joy dwell in all sentient beings. May all sentient beings end their suffering in the cause of their suffering. May all sentient beings have compassionate joy. May all sentient beings release their attachments to their loved ones, as well as their aversions to others. These beings never take up a weapon, neither the weapon of the body, nor the weapon of thought or language. You can recognize them by this. These beings live the virtue of peacefulness. For out of this virtue, peace can arise, which leads beings to turn their back on war and embark on the path through the gateless gate towards peace. Please feel free to share this story. The author of this story has expressly permitted sharing this story. I wish you all the guidance of the Spirit from which all comes, into which all will return.